Nancy Der Priest was born on March 4, 1968 in Texas. She had an older sister and a younger brother, but soon after his birth, their parents' marriage collapsed. NY's father was in the military and spent most of his time stationed at a base in Japan. At some point, her mother learned that he was involved with another woman there. But rather than seek a divorce, however, she moved to another town, leaving the children behind with their father. He brought them to Japan, and Nancy spent the next several years living there. At just 13, she and her family returned to the United States, and Nancy firmly decided to reconnect with her mother. She went to live with her in a small Texas town where her grandparents also lived. Over the next few years, Nancy and her mother became very close indeed. Nancy was also doing quite well at school, and wanting to provide her mother with needed help, she started taking various side jobs while still a teenager. While she was in high school, Nancy met a boy named Todd, and their relationship became serious in a remarkably short time. Before long, they discussed getting married and raising a family, which made NY's mother uneasy. She hoped Nancy would finish college and find a good career before settling into marriage. But Nancy was set on staying with Todd no matter what. On the day she turned 18, Nancy and Todd fled to another town, and a few months afterward they married. Todd then joined the military, and the couple moved to Austin, where he was still stationed. Sometime afterward, Nancy gave birth to their daughter, Sylvia. By 1988, Sylvia was slightly more than a year old, while Nancy was 20. Todd continued serving at a base close to their home as Nancy had begun working at Pizza Hut. She was diligent, dependable, and serious about her work, so she was promoted to assistant manager before long. Thus, at 20, Nancy had a loving husband, a young daughter, and a good job. Her mother had ultimately accepted her choice to marry Todd, and they had repaired their relationship, which meant a lot to Nancy. She had also taken up softball, and she and Todd played whenever they were able. On Monday, October 24th, Nancy was scheduled to work the evening shift that night. However, she also had a softball game scheduled that night, so she asked management to switch her to the morning shift instead. That morning, Nancy woke up quite early and drove to work with her daughter. She and Todd had a routine they used whenever they were both working early, because it was still too early for Nancy to take Sylvia to the babysitter's house herself. Nancy drove to the restaurant with Sylvia in her car, while Todd followed behind on his motorcycle. Once they arrived there, he would leave the motorcycle in the Pizza Hut parking lot, take the car, and drive Sylvia to the babysitter. He would then come back to the restaurant, say goodbye to Nancy, and leave the car with her before riding his motorcycle to the military base. That Monday followed the same routine. They reached the Pizza Hut at about 7 in the morning. Then, a little under an hour later, Todd returned after dropping Sylvia off. He knocked on the door, gave Nancy the car keys, and then left for work. Although Nancy had arrived at the restaurant that early, it would not open for customers until 11, which was still 4 hours away. Until that time, she was expected to get the restaurant ready for the day and prepare the pizza dough, all while working there completely alone. At approximately 8:30 a.m., the district manager started calling Pizza Hut locations all across the city. This was part of his usual routine, allowing him to ensure that every restaurant was being prepared for opening. But when he called NY's location, nobody answered, which immediately struck him as unusual. He called several more times during the following hour. When Nancy still did not answer, he decided to drive there and check on the restaurant himself. As soon as he approached the building, he noticed something strange. The employee entrance was left open, although staff members were required to keep every door locked while getting the restaurant ready before opening. When he stepped inside, he saw water spread across the floor, but Nancy was nowhere in sight. He walked toward the kitchen and heard the dough mixer running, which told him that Nancy had arrived and started preparing for the day, but he had no idea where she had gone afterward. As he approached the restrooms, he realized the water seemed to be coming from the men's room. He opened the door and was met with a horrifying sight. Nancy was lying beneath the sink, unclothed, with her hands tied behind her back. A large amount of blood was also surrounding her head. The manager immediately fled the restroom and called 911. When paramedics arrived and saw Nancy, they initially thought she was already dead. To their surprise, however, she still had a faint pulse at that moment, so they rushed her to the hospital. As doctors struggled to save her life, police began examining the crime scene. From NY's condition, it appeared the attacker had made her remove her clothes, bound her hands with her own bra, and then shot her in the head. Her clothes were still lying on the restroom floor. Nearby, investigators found a single spent .22 caliber shell casing. They also found that someone had stuffed an apron into the sink drain and left the water running, causing the sink to overflow and flood the floor. In the dining area, crime scene technicians found a short strand of hair that they believed might have belonged to the attacker. So, it was promptly collected and sent to a lab for testing. Investigators also discovered that the floor safe had been emptied. Cash was usually stored there overnight, and one of the first duties of the morning staff was taking out the money and counting it. This provided detectives with a basic theory about what may have occurred. It seemed someone had entered the restaurant planning to steal from it, but had additionally chosen to assault Nancy before firing the gun. At first, this appeared to suggest a robbery that had turned violent, rather than an attack that had been planned specifically against her, although detectives could not yet know that for certain or know why she was targeted. Finding Nancy without her clothing caused police to consider that theory, though at that stage they had no physical evidence proving that oral assault had actually occurred. Robberies at restaurants were relatively common throughout the area then. 4 other nearby Pizza Hut restaurants had recently been held up, but nobody had been hurt in any of those incidents. Those crimes had likewise occurred during late evening or nighttime hours while the restaurants remained open, though there were very few customers inside. The incident at NY's restaurant was plainly unlike them. After checking every entrance, investigators discovered no indication of forced entry. Because employees were required to keep the doors locked until opening time, detectives were left considering 2 primary possibilities. Either Nancy knew the assailant and allowed him to enter, or he possessed a master key capable of unlocking every Pizza Hut within the district. Every assistant manager, Nancy included, carried one of those keys. Several higher-ranking employees did too, meaning there was a fairly large number of people who had access. Meanwhile, as police continued examining the restaurant, doctors remained focused on keeping Nancy alive. Unfortunately, the gunshot injuries were far too serious. Doctors put her into a medically induced coma and informed Todd that she had no possibility of regaining consciousness. He would therefore have to make the heartbreaking choice to take her off life support. That evening, NY's family and friends arrived at the hospital to say their final goodbyes. Once she died, the investigation officially shifted into a murder case. As expected, medical examiners located a .22 caliber bullet lodged inside NY's head, causing extensive damage to her brain. No evidence of a physical struggle appeared anywhere on her body, indicating the attacker had surprised her completely and given her virtually no opportunity to protect herself. The examination likewise verified that Nancy had been sexually assaulted, and investigators managed to collect biological material that her killer had left behind. Unfortunately, during the late 1980s, DNA analysis remained in its infancy, leaving investigators with extremely limited technology. That same limitation affected the short hair recovered from the dining area. Since the strand had no attached root, specialists could not generate a DNA profile from it, leaving them able only to examine it microscopically against hair samples belonging to potential suspects. Put simply, detectives were looking for a murderer while possessing almost no valuable evidence, although the limited DNA testing available then could possibly lead them toward the right person eventually. Detectives first interviewed the manager who had discovered Nancy and quickly established that he could not have committed the crime. He had remained in his office all morning, making calls and talking with employees from multiple different locations. Investigators also discovered that at about 8:30 that morning, Nancy had contacted the company supplying the restaurant. The district manager had first attempted to call her at approximately the same time, but by then she had stopped answering the phone. This reduced the probable attack window to about 8:30 or shortly afterward. It also enabled detectives to promptly eliminate NY's husband. Todd had reached the military base before Nancy placed her last phone call, meaning he could not have physically carried out the crime. That placed him elsewhere by the time detectives believed Nancy had been attacked, making him an unlikely suspect from the beginning. During the following days, detectives questioned every employee who worked at NY's restaurant, yet none caused any major concern. Each had an alibi, and investigators discovered nothing suggesting that any of them had played a role in the murder. Police then secured a list of workers at other Pizza Hut restaurants throughout the city who possessed master keys and started checking them individually. The investigations progressed more slowly, because the department had limited resources. Then, on November 9th, only a few weeks after the killing, detectives got an intriguing tip. By then, the restaurant had reopened, and management had hired a security guard who told the manager about something he considered suspicious. Because the restaurant had already reopened, the guard's observations were important, and detectives wanted to know exactly why the two men had come there and what they hoped to learn from him at that moment. One evening, two young men drove up outside the restaurant and remained in their car across from the building for a while, with the headlights still shining. Eventually, they walked inside, ordered beer, and started lifting their glasses and making toasts to NY's memory. The guard found their conduct odd, but it became even more suspicious when one man came over and began questioning him. He asked how long the restaurant had employed a security guard, whether police had suspects or evidence, and what investigators knew about NY's murder. At one point, he asked if it was true that NY's body had been discovered near the cash register, and he even suggested there had to be two killers. The guard later discovered that both men worked at another Pizza Hut restaurant. One of them also claimed that he had been opening his own restaurant when Nancy was killed, supposedly giving him an alibi. The whole encounter appeared suspicious enough for the guard to tell the manager, who then called detectives. Investigators identified the pair as 22-year-old Christopher Aoa and 18-year-old Richard Danziger. They worked at another Pizza Hut and shared an apartment, while Richard was also dating Donna, the manager of that restaurant. That meant both men possessed a master key and would have known the routine followed by employees working the morning shift. Yet detectives learned more. After talking with their restaurant manager, investigators discovered that Richard had been scheduled to open the location at 8 on the morning Nancy was murdered. When the appointed time arrived, however, nobody was there. The manager called Richard's girlfriend, Donna, who said he was at her house and had slept too long. Eventually, the manager had to drive over and open the restaurant himself. Richard and Donna did not arrive until about 30 minutes later, sometime after 10:00 in the morning. Detectives first visited the apartment Richard shared with Christopher, but neither man was there. They then went to Donna's house, where they found Richard inside. The officers explained that they wanted to ask him some questions and asked him to come to the station, but his response immediately concerned them. Richard said he had been expecting their arrival and was surprised they had taken so long to appear. He then pointed toward Donna and said, "That's my alibi." Richard claimed that he and Christopher had gone to Donna's house the previous night and remained there drinking until late. He spent the night with his girlfriend, but slept through his shift and woke only after his manager contacted Donna. She backed up Richard's account, but said alcohol caused her to sleep extremely deeply. Therefore, if he had left the house early that morning, she might not have realized it. As detectives listened, they noticed a contradiction. According to the security guard who had initially reported the men's unusual behavior, Richard had specifically said he was opening his own restaurant when Nancy was murdered, supposedly giving him an alibi. Now detectives knew he had not reached work until several hours after the crime. Richard eventually agreed to accompany them to the station, where he made several additional interesting statements. When detectives asked what he knew about the murder, he gave them several unexpectedly specific details. Richard knew Nancy had been shot using a .22 caliber weapon, and he also knew the murderer had blocked the sink with a blue apron, causing the restaurant to flood. None of those details had been made public, so detectives were left with an obvious question. How could Richard know those facts? At that moment, detectives were trying to understand how he had obtained such private information. His changing explanations only made their suspicions stronger, but they still lacked enough proof to hold him or formally accuse him of the killing. He said he had learned them from the security guard at NY's restaurant when they spoke, but detectives had already questioned the guard, and he had told them that he knew almost nothing about the crime. When detectives challenged Richard's explanation, he changed it, saying he might have heard those details from his manager instead. One detective immediately phoned the manager and asked what caliber the bullet was and what color apron had been used to plug the drain, but the manager could answer neither question. When detectives directly told Richard they believed he had killed Nancy, he stayed defiant, arguing that they had no evidence and would never manage to pin the murder on him. Even with his suspicious conduct, police were forced to release him. They still lacked physical evidence connecting him to the crime, leaving them without grounds to charge him. Detectives then brought Christopher in for an interview, and his demeanor was noticeably unlike Richard's. Richard had seemed composed and confident, whereas Christopher was plainly nervous. He too denied having any involvement in NY's murder. He confirmed that all three had spent the night before the killing drinking at Donna's house. Christopher said Richard remained there overnight, while he drove back to their apartment by himself. Still, detectives believed Christopher was concealing something. They did not think he had personally participated in the murder, and suspected he was more likely protecting his friend. Christopher had no criminal history, had been an honor student at school, and came from what seemed to be a respectable family. With that in mind, detectives kept applying pressure over the next several hours. They warned Christopher that continuing to protect Richard could leave both of them facing the death penalty, and told him his only opportunity was to reveal what had actually happened. Eventually, their pressure started working, and Christopher began altering his account. At first, he claimed Richard had admitted killing Nancy, but afterward he changed his story again. This time, Christopher said he had gone to the Pizza Hut with Richard, but stayed outside while Richard carried out the murder. However, when he gave that same account during a polygraph test, the examiner determined that he was deceptive, causing Christopher to change his story once more. Finally, Christopher said that while they were drinking at Donna's house that night, Richard proposed robbing another Pizza Hut. They possessed a master key and knew the previous night's money would still be in the safe. Christopher initially rejected the idea, but Richard eventually persuaded him to participate. The next morning, they met near NY's restaurant at around 7. They watched Nancy say goodbye to Todd before entering, then followed her inside. With the master key, they unlocked the door and went into the kitchen, where Nancy was preparing pizza dough. She knew both men and asked why they were there, but Richard answered by pulling a gun and demanding the money. After opening the safe, Nancy surrendered the cash, and Richard instructed Christopher to bind her hands. The robbery then turned into a violent attack that left her defenseless inside the restaurant. The two men then took turns sexually assaulting her before Richard fired into her head, knowing that if Nancy lived, she would immediately tell police who they were. Once Christopher gave detectives this account, they put him in a motel because he continued sharing an apartment with Richard, who could discover that he had talked to authorities. Police wanted to keep them apart while preparing the arrests. For the next several days, investigators prepared to arrest both suspects. Then, on November 15th, both men were taken into custody. Even so, prosecutors encountered a major obstacle. State law required more than a confession and eyewitness testimony alone to obtain a conviction, meaning prosecutors needed evidence connecting the suspects to the crime before they could hope to win the case in court. Because Richard continued denying any involvement, much of the prosecution's case rested on DNA evidence. Specialists compared the biological profile obtained from the semen on NY's body against samples from both suspects. But DNA testing then was extremely limited and bore little resemblance to modern technology. Put simply, it could eliminate someone using blood type and a handful of genetic markers, or merely establish that a suspect could not be excluded as a potential source. In Richard's case, testing established that the semen definitely was not his. Christopher, however, could not be completely excluded as the person who had deposited the sample. Regarding the hair recovered from the restaurant floor, prosecutors called an expert who examined it alongside Richard's hair through a microscope. The expert found the two strands highly similar and said they could have originated from the same person. The evidence was hardly conclusive, but combined with Christopher's statements, it was sufficient to keep the prosecution moving ahead. Both suspects stayed behind bars awaiting trial. During that period, several incidents occurred. At one point, Richard assaulted Christopher, threw boiling water into his face, and yelled that he had betrayed him. Roughly a week later, Christopher accepted an agreement under which prosecutors removed the death penalty in return for his testimony against Richard. Regarding Richard, prosecutors chose to accuse him of sexual assault instead of murder. That charge demanded a lower level of proof while still carrying a possible life sentence. The trial opened in January 1990, over a year after NY's murder. By then, Christopher's account had shifted once more. He had earlier said Richard was the person who shot Nancy, but now acknowledged that he had actually fired the weapon himself. Christopher further explained what they had done to Nancy during the assault, and his testimony became so disturbing that her mother became sick and was forced to leave the courtroom. Christopher maintained that he had never wanted to participate, but said Richard made him do it through threats. Christopher testified that Richard eventually gave him the gun and instructed him to kill Nancy. Christopher shot her, and afterward the two men dragged her into the restroom to remove any possible evidence. They cleaned the surfaces they had touched, plugged the sink, and left the water running before carrying NY's body into the hallway. Donna also took the stand, and her testimony did little to strengthen Richard's defense. She told jurors that after his manager woke her that morning, she and Richard drove over to the restaurant. She noticed the driver's seat had been moved considerably farther back than it normally was. However, Donna had never authorized anyone to use her car. The keys had been hanging from a hook inside her house, and they were still there that morning. She further told the court that several days after the killing, while she and Richard were talking about what had occurred, he looked at her and asked, "I was with you, right?" Prosecutors argued that Richard had slipped out of the apartment that morning while Donna slept deeply, driven her car to NY's restaurant, carried out the murder, then returned to the apartment and gone back to sleep, making it appear that he had an alibi. Richard maintained that the entire account was fabricated and that he had never left Donna's apartment. Nevertheless, the jury convicted him, and he received a life sentence. Several days afterward, Christopher was given the same punishment, effectively ending the case. Richard still denied taking part and tried to challenge his conviction on appeal, but soon afterward, an event occurred that would alter his life forever. Roughly a year into his sentence, another prisoner attacked him and repeatedly kicked him in the head. Richard was taken to the hospital, where doctors had to remove part of his brain. The resulting injuries left him unable to look after himself and essentially disabled, meaning he needed constant medical care. Even after leaving the hospital, he was sent back into the general prison population where other inmates abused him. His lawyers continued contesting the conviction, arguing that no physical evidence had ever tied Richard to the crime, and that state law did not permit a conviction based solely upon witness testimony. The appeals court disagreed, ruling that the circumstantial evidence was sufficient and allowing the conviction to remain intact. Christopher did not appeal because of the agreement he had accepted, and over the next several years, the case seemed finished, or so it appeared. In 1996, the Austin police chief received a letter, with copies also delivered to a local newspaper and a civil rights organization. A man named Akeem Marino had written it while serving 3 life sentences for sexual assault and robbery. In his letter, Marino claimed responsibility for Nancy Dreest's murder and said he could not understand why 2 other men were imprisoned for the crime. He maintained that he had acted alone and had never encountered either Richard or Christopher. When explaining his decision to confess, Marino said he had become a Christian and now believed it was his responsibility to help release 2 innocent men. He provided a detailed account of the crime and said he could readily prove that he was responsible. Marino had been arrested on an unrelated charge only weeks after NY's murder, and some items he had stolen from the restaurant were still stored at his parents' home. He therefore urged police to visit the house and retrieve them. The police chief tasked detectives with checking the information, and they soon visited Marino's parents' house. Inside, they discovered 2 Pizza Hut bags typically used to transport cash, along with $150, precisely the amount employees said should have been inside the safe when Nancy reported for work. Officers also found a master key for the restaurants and a set of handcuffs that Marino claimed he had originally used to restrain Nancy. Even with all of that, investigators were unwilling to conclude that Marino was the murderer or that the other 2 men were innocent. The investigation barely moved forward during the following years, and detectives did not decide to interview Christopher until 1998. They withheld some of what they had discovered and instead asked him if a third person had participated in NY's murder. Christopher said there had been only 2 people and continued maintaining that his confession was truthful. Investigators searched for any link connecting Marino, Christopher, and Richard, but found nothing. They also discovered that the firearm Marino said he had used was still being held by the El Paso Police Department. Detectives therefore requested a ballistics test. The findings, however, could not establish that the bullet removed from NY's body had come from that gun. Without a clear answer, police once again let the investigation disappear into the background. Christopher, meanwhile, kept wondering why detectives had unexpectedly questioned him almost 10 years after the killing. Later, he heard rumors that a prisoner at another facility had confessed to NY's murder, although police did not believe his claim. Christopher started looking for organizations assisting prisoners who had been wrongfully convicted and eventually contacted the Wisconsin Innocence Project. The organization had only recently been created and had not yet helped overturn anyone's conviction, but the team took an interest in Christopher's case. 2 professors from the University of Wisconsin Law School operated it and examined suspected wrongful convictions alongside their students. In his letter, Christopher claimed for the first time that he had played no role in NY's murder and that detectives had coerced his confession. He explained that he had admitted committing the crime because he feared for his life. Christopher said detectives had persuaded him that he would be sentenced to death and that confessing was his only chance to save himself. He maintained that neither he nor Richard had participated in NY's murder. When officers initially brought him to the station, he honestly thought they were simply questioning every Pizza Hut employee. He had been raised in a law-abiding household and had always believed police officers existed to protect and assist people. As a result, he was entirely unprepared for what followed. One detective, Hector Polano, claimed that people on the streets called him the devil and told Christopher there was no chance he was getting out of this. For the next 20 hours, detectives maintained relentless pressure on him. Polano repeatedly warned Christopher that he would receive the death penalty. At one point, he seized Christopher's arm, indicated a vein, and showed him where the lethal injection would be administered. He also displayed photographs from previous executions and told him the same fate awaited him. The detective then put NY's autopsy pictures in front of Christopher and made him look at them. Christopher was not actually arrested and legally could have walked away whenever he wanted. However, he did not realize that. When he requested an attorney, investigators told him that he could not have one until formal charges had been filed. Christopher said Polano also hurled a chair toward him, pounded his hands on the table, and shouted at him. He even warned Christopher that once he was sent to prison, he would become fresh meat for the other inmates. By the interrogation's end, Christopher was so terrified and drained that he started agreeing with detectives simply to make it stop. He said they had provided neither food nor water and had denied him any meaningful break from the questioning. Eventually, they promised that if he gave a statement against Richard, they would let him go home. Christopher agreed, and detectives tried to film his confession, but it soon became obvious that he lacked crucial knowledge about the crime, forcing officers to repeatedly halt the recording and correct what he said. Eventually, they understood they could not obtain a confession on tape that would stand up in court, so they brought in a typewriter instead. Christopher was instructed to sign a blank page, and Detective Polano then typed a statement for him. At that stage, Christopher still believed the truth would eventually emerge, and that his and Richard's innocence would become clear. Instead, he was arrested for murder and told that the only way to escape the death penalty was to accept a deal and testify against Richard at trial. Detectives still lacked evidence directly connecting Christopher to the crime. So, he said, they instructed him to alter his statement again and claimed that he had fired the weapon himself. This would make convicting Richard of sexual assault easier while still permitting prosecutors to pursue a life sentence. Christopher also explained why, when detectives came to see him in prison after receiving Marino's letter, he had again maintained that his original testimony was truthful. By then, he had completely lost trust in police and thought they might be attempting to frame him again, potentially ruining whatever chance he had of ever receiving parole. Because of that concern, Christopher chose to maintain the account he had already given, believing that nobody was genuinely trying to assist him. After reviewing Christopher's letter, the Innocence Project located the attorney who had defended him at trial. Surprisingly, the lawyer claimed police had actually recovered Christopher's fingerprints from the murder weapon, and that 2 witnesses had spotted both suspects near the restaurant that morning, making their guilt unmistakable. After hearing that, the team was prepared to reject Christopher's case. Before doing so, however, they called him in prison and asked why he had omitted such critical information. Christopher insisted that none of it was true and pleaded with them to verify it themselves. When they investigated, they found that he was correct. Police had never recovered the murder weapon, and no witnesses had placed Christopher and Richard outside NY's restaurant. Christopher said he had repeatedly attempted to convince his attorneys, on several separate occasions, that his confession was untrue, yet they still refused to accept his account at all. Instead, they maintained that taking a plea agreement was his only possible way to stay alive. Even Christopher's mother pleaded with him to accept the deal. Not because she believed he was guilty, but because she feared he would receive a death sentence. At one point, the pressure became so intense that she was hospitalized with serious and ongoing heart problems. This was also one especially important reason Christopher ultimately agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. His attorneys uncovered another troubling detail. Years earlier, Detective Polano had been suspended after someone secretly recorded him beating a suspect while attempting to force a confession from him. Despite this, Polano was later reinstated and permitted to keep serving as a detective. When the attorneys examined Christopher's confession in much greater detail, they discovered several serious contradictions. Christopher had said Nancy was shot in the hallway, yet the spent casing was discovered inside the men's room. Crime scene photos also revealed blood splatter on a bucket within that same restroom, offering additional evidence that Nancy had actually been shot there. The timeline was even harder to explain. As we know, Todd initially drove Nancy to the restaurant, then took their daughter to the babysitter and came back to hand Nancy the car keys. Nancy came to the door and everything seemed perfectly normal. Christopher, however, claimed that he and Richard entered the restaurant right after Todd first dropped Nancy off. If that were true, Todd could not have returned almost an hour later and found Nancy unharmed. By then, the Innocence Project attorneys were certain Christopher had no involvement in the crime and began actively pursuing his case. They discovered that biological evidence recovered from NY's body was still being preserved. In February 2000, they formally requested fresh DNA testing. By then, DNA technology had progressed substantially. When experts compared semen recovered from NY's body with samples from Christopher and Richard, neither man was a match. They next tested a sample from A. Marino, and this time the result was conclusive. There was no question that the semen found on NY's body belonged to him. Experts also re-examined the hair recovered from the restaurant floor and concluded that it did not belong to any of the three men, because the original microscopic hair comparison had been among the key evidence used against Richard. This new result further weakened the entire case against him. After the police department finally learned of these developments, the investigators finally went to speak with Marino in person themselves. Once again, he confessed and described NY's murder in remarkable detail. On that fateful morning, Marino said he had been looking for a restaurant where only one employee was working so he could rob it. He dressed in work clothes, carried a folding ladder, and walked around the area searching for a suitable place. His first choice was another restaurant on the same street, where he told an employee that management had sent him there to make some repairs. They allowed him inside, but after realizing that the only worker there was a man, he walked back out. Marino explained that he had developed a grudge against a blonde woman who had hurt him before. Because of this, he had decided that if he encountered another woman resembling her, he would kill her simply for the thrill. Only a few minutes afterward, he knocked at the door of NY's Pizza Hut. She had no reason to become suspicious and believed his explanation about coming there to perform repairs, so she let him enter. Marino stayed inside the restaurant for some time before drawing a gun and sexually assaulting Nancy. He then brought her into the restroom and said he would handcuff her to a pipe so she could not contact police. But the moment Nancy turned her back, Marino shot her in the head. He searched afterward for the spent casing, but was unable to locate it. Worried that his fingerprints could be on it, he chose to flood the restaurant, hoping the water would destroy whatever evidence he had left behind. Marino also told investigators that he had made repeated efforts to help Christopher and Richard gain their freedom, but letters he sent to different officials received no response. In 1998, he had even contacted George W. Bush, then governor of Texas, but that letter was ignored as well. By then, investigators had little doubt Marino was the actual murderer, and that Christopher and Richard had spent almost 12 years behind bars for a crime they had not committed. Police requested another analysis of the firearm Marino said he had used, and this time experts confirmed that the casing discovered inside NY's restaurant had been fired from that gun. Together with the DNA findings, the ballistics evidence established beyond doubt that Marino was guilty. Then, in January 2001, a judge ordered Christopher's immediate release. Richard's circumstances were more complicated because his brain injury left him needing constant medical care. His family required several months to ready their home for him, but he was eventually released too. Marino was subsequently charged with NY's murder, although he entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. He did not dispute killing her, but claimed he had been hearing voices and believed human sacrifices would grant him supernatural powers. Medical experts determined that Marino understood what he was doing. Prosecutors therefore announced that they intended to seek the death penalty. NY's mother, however, urged them not to. She explained that 2 innocent men's lives had already been destroyed and said she did not want another death added to everything that had occurred. Marino was eventually convicted and given another life sentence on top of the 3 life terms he was already serving for robbing and sexually assaulting other women. Later, attorneys for Christopher and Richard filed lawsuits against authorities, and both cases were eventually settled. Christopher received $5 million, while Richard was awarded more than $10 million. Richard's family also brought a separate lawsuit against Christopher because his testimony had resulted in Richard being imprisoned. Eventually, both sides reached an agreement requiring Christopher to pay Richard $500,000. Christopher repeatedly voiced regret over what had happened to Richard and said he felt accountable for his suffering. Following his release, he enrolled at the University of Wisconsin Law School, the same university where the Innocence Project that had helped establish his innocence was located. He later became an attorney. However, in 2021, Christopher ended up behind bars again. He pleaded guilty in an investment fraud case and agreed with the other people involved to repay the victims $3.5 million. Consequently, he received a 29-month prison sentence, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Richard lived out the remainder of his life under continuous care from relatives, unable to care for himself or complete even basic everyday tasks without help. His condition kept worsening over the years, and in 2021, he died from cancer at age 50. Meanwhile, the detectives who had effectively pressured Christopher into confessing to NY's murder experienced a very different outcome. A lawsuit was brought against them, but the court determined there was insufficient evidence showing they had coerced Christopher into accepting responsibility for a crime he did not commit. Therefore, none of the detectives suffered any consequences, and they all retained their jobs. Yet perhaps the most infuriating part concerned Detective Polano, the man Christopher claimed had subjected him to the most intense pressure. After Polano was temporarily suspended for allegedly coercing another suspect into confessing, he sued the department, alleging that he had been discriminated against because of his Mexican background. Ultimately, he was not only reinstated but also received $290,000 in compensation. And that is how this complicated case finally reached its conclusion, leaving almost everyone involved with permanent damage, except the detectives, whose actions had helped ruin the lives of 2 innocent men and who never faced any genuine consequences. Northern Ireland, May 1991. The quiet town of Coleraine. Colin, a highly regarded local dentist and committed member of the Baptist community, tells police that his wife Leslie has disappeared. A major search operation begins. Not long afterward, detectives inspect a disused garage. Inside the locked building rests a passenger car with its motor still running. What investigators discover inside immediately sparks questions. In the driver's seat lies Trevor, an active police officer, dead. Leslie is found inside the vehicle's trunk. She's wearing headphones attached to a portable music player, with Christian music continuing to play through them. The medical examination concludes that both victims died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Before long, detectives identify what seems to be a motive. Colin and Trevor's wife had maintained a concealed romantic affair. To investigators, the evidence appears to make sense. The official finding is a double case of self-harm involving 2 betrayed spouses who were unable to cope emotionally with the devastating consequences of their spouse's secret affairs. The investigation is closed rapidly, yet pause and consider that for a moment. How often would someone intending to take their own life choose to crawl into a confined car trunk and place headphones on beforehand? In 1991, that technical contradiction apparently did not trouble investigators whatsoever. This was a deliberately concealed crime that stayed unsolved for 18 years. It required a lengthy series of personal catastrophes before authorities finally understood that on that spring evening, neither person had any intention of voluntarily dying. To understand where this story started, we have to return several decades. Colin was born in 1959. He was raised in Belfast within a large household with 2 brothers and 2 sisters. From childhood onward, everyday existence centered on the strict teachings of the Baptist Church. He generally kept away from the limelight, shunned attention in everyday life, and developed into a rather quiet person. When deciding on a profession, he chose to pursue medicine. During college, he met Leslie. She was 1 year younger. Born in Plymouth, England, she grew up in Dublin. Like Colin, she was raised within a strict Christian setting and came to train as a nurse. Because they shared comparable religious beliefs and principles from the beginning, the two students quickly formed a bond and became close. Yet the picture of moral perfection they presented to everyone soon started to fracture. In private, they knowingly broke one of the most severe rules of their religious community by entering a premarital relationship. Then Leslie learned that she was pregnant. At that stage, that kind of medical procedure remained illegal in their country. Among their community, being publicly exposed in the eyes of others would have brought instant expulsion and enduring shame. Colin devised what he considered an answer. He brought Leslie to a clinic in London where the procedure could legally be obtained at the time. Even more striking, this was not an isolated mistake. Before their legal marriage, the pair traveled to England twice more for precisely the same purpose. It prompts an obvious question. After 3 hidden journeys, what does it feel like to stand before your spiritual mentors and behave as if nothing had ever occurred? In my opinion, this was the point when a dangerous pattern started forming as a result. Colin discovered that any danger to his reputation could disappear, provided everything remained concealed from everyone else. In 1983, they officially married and relocated farther from their relatives. 1 year later, their first son, Matthew, was born. Leslie left nursing for good and devoted all her attention to the family and household. Meanwhile, Colin was rapidly climbing the social ladder in the years ahead. He opened a prosperous dental practice and became deeply involved with youth programs at the local church. Congregation members sincerely respected his dedication and devotion. 3 years afterward, their daughter Lauren was born, and in 1989, their son Daniel followed. Looking after 3 small children left Leslie utterly exhausted. While most of her days were consumed by the demands of domestic life, her husband kept receiving admiration as a respected community leader. Then a succession of crushing emotional setbacks arrived. First, Leslie's mother died. Soon afterward, another distressing reality emerged. She learned that her apparently perfect husband had maintained a secret month-long affair with a former classmate. Struggling with the betrayal and the worsening depression that came afterward, Leslie started drinking frequently. Alcohol slowly became her main means of escape from reality. That same year, not long after recovering from giving birth to her 3rd child, she received another devastating revelation. She was pregnant once more. The thought of bringing up 4 sons and daughters drove her toward an emotional breaking point. From the outside, the household continued to appear perfect, yet behind that carefully polished picture stood a thoroughly exhausted woman and a man who was becoming more at ease with concealing the fallout from his own behavior. As the family turmoil intensified, Colin exposed a remarkable contradiction within his character. In their home, he acted as an extremely possessive husband in private life. The dentist could scarcely stand Leslie engaging in normal conversations with other men, and often personally initiated arguments driven by jealousy. And when you consider it, that's an especially cynical stance for a man who had only recently been caught in his own infidelity. Yet in Colin's world, strict standards appeared to govern everyone except himself. Before very long, another family moved into town. Trevor Buchanan, a serving police officer, relocated to Coleraine with his wife Hazel and their son and daughter. Hazel accepted a teaching role at the church's Sunday school, where Colin was already a deeply committed volunteer. Since Colin regularly took Matthew, Lauren, and Daniel to church activities, he now had an entirely legitimate reason to be around the new teacher. They encountered each other constantly at church outings, local events, and swimming classes. His image as a devoted church mentor provided the ideal cover. There was no reason for anyone to become suspicious. Before long, a clandestine affair began between the dentist and the police officer's wife. For a considerable period, their arrangement functioned perfectly. Colin would leave home saying he was going for a run, yet his route regularly finished outside Hazel's house while Trevor was away patrolling the streets. Hazel had a convenient story of her own. She told others that she was spending hours shopping when she was actually going directly to Colin's private dental practice. And this brings us to a detail that, personally, I consider particularly disturbing because of how deliberate it seems. Hazel was tormented by intense guilt over betraying her husband. The emotional strain grew so severe that it began interfering with the affair itself. So, what did the trained doctor do? Colin placed her in a dental chair and administered nitrous oxide, the gas widely known as laughing gas. As she breathed it in, he repeatedly assured her that their relationship was somehow destined, claiming that fate could not have brought them together otherwise. Consider that for a moment. A medical professional was using workplace drugs to chemically relieve his partner's moral struggle and emotional suffering. For an unexpectedly long period, they succeeded in concealing the affair within a fairly small town. Their arrangement eventually started falling apart when Hazel discovered she was pregnant. At that stage, everything became urgent. She had no way of knowing the child's biological father. If the baby looked like her lover rather than her husband, both families, their reputations, and everything they had created might collapse overnight. The choice was made rapidly. Colin did not devise another answer. Instead, he went back to the same approach he had previously depended upon. He bought plane tickets and personally traveled with Hazel to the same London clinic, following a route he had memorized years earlier before his own marriage. The issue was dealt with according to a familiar pattern. Nothing was left behind in Ireland. Believing themselves beyond consequences, the pair went home with no intention of ending their affair. Ironically, the entire setup started coming apart because of one basic mistake. A congregation member spotted Colin and Hazel's vehicles parked beside each other near a wooded spot. Curious, the witness approached and saw them together inside one of the cars. Instead of causing a scene in public, the church member took another course. He went straight to the pastor and disclosed everything he had witnessed. The church's response was immediate and uncompromising. Church leaders promptly stripped Colin and Hazel of their positions within the congregation. Leslie and Trevor, the spouses who had been betrayed, were told about the affair. Church leadership placed both marriages under compulsory counseling and strictly prohibited any additional contact between the two lovers. The restrictions became so severe that Colin and Hazel were directed to attend Sunday services at entirely separate times. For Leslie, the revelation merely confirmed suspicions she had already begun forming herself. By then, she had discreetly started watching her husband's conduct much more carefully. One detail stood out to her. In Colin's trousers pockets, she repeatedly discovered an unusually high number of 20-pence coins. At that time, those coins were frequently used in public payphones. The accomplished dentist already kept telephones both at home and in his practice. At that point, there was hardly any reason to carry so much loose change, unless he required a method of making calls that could not readily be traced through household phone records. It's striking how meticulously hidden secrets can begin falling apart because of something so minor. As the weeks pass, tension within the family approaches, over time, a breaking point. In early May of 1991, Leslie's father dies. The bereavement compounds the emotional pressure created by her husband's betrayal and drives her into an even more serious crisis. Alone inside the house, in private, she swallows a substantial amount of strong pain medication. Yet before the drugs can completely take hold, her instinct to survive overpowers her hopelessness. Leslie climbs into her car, drives herself to a nearby hospital's emergency department, and asks physicians to carry out emergency stomach treatment. She repeatedly begs hospital staff not to record what happened. Hospital protocol allows no exceptions. The incident is formally entered into her medical record as an attempt to end her own life. Once home again, in the household, Leslie makes what seem like her last attempts to rescue the marriage. She changes her hair. She purchases fresh clothing, yet her husband responds with detached indifference. Battling loneliness, she starts placing brief handwritten messages around the house. One such note says, "My darling, I'm going to sleep now. I don't know for how long. Thank you for all the good times." Colin discovers the message. Most people would interpret those words as a warning and an immediate reason to check on someone they love. Yet based on what investigators later discovered, as a result, Colin interpreted them very differently. The recent medical documentation, paired with a handwritten goodbye, seemed to establish the groundwork for a convincing explanation later on. Only 4 months after the church restrictions were imposed, Colin and Hazel quietly resumed communicating. During their discussions, Colin presents a scheme he considers thoroughly calculated. The concept itself is quite straightforward. If Leslie were removed from the picture, he would be a widower likely to receive sympathy from everyone around him. And if Trevor disappeared too, nothing would remain to prevent Colin and Hazel from openly living together as a couple. Hazel is horrified by the suggestion by then. At first, she rejects it, frightened by exposure and the prospect of spending years in prison. but Colin remains completely certain he is right by this point. He repeatedly tells her from the start that he has devised a perfect plan and that police would never manage to piece everything together. Under his scheme, Hazel's sole task that night is to secretly put potent sedatives into her husband's food or drink beforehand. The objective is quite straightforward. In practice, make the seasoned police officer too impaired to fight back when Colin arrives. On the morning of May 19, 1991, Colin phones the local police station. He delivers a convincing act, sounding frightened and distressed, while asking whether any serious traffic accidents occurred during the night. In his account, Leslie had gone out after an argument the night before and never returned. When officers came to talk to him, one detail instantly catches their attention. Fresh scratches and obvious injuries are visible across the respected dentist's face. Consider that for a moment. How can someone account for recent physical injuries on precisely the day their spouse suddenly vanishes? Colin already has his explanation ready. He informs detectives that Trevor confronted him the previous day. In his version of events, the police officer had learned the affair was continuing, turned hostile, and a struggle broke out. Colin says Trevor subsequently took Leslie away with him, and together they drove off. Suddenly, the wounds across his face seem to have a perfectly reasonable explanation. Detectives make their way to question Hazel. The recently widowed woman calmly confirms the carefully rehearsed story, almost word for word. She says Leslie had come to their house, that an angry confrontation occurred, and that the two spouses eventually departed together in the same car. Every detail now seems to fit flawlessly. Meanwhile, Colin starts openly expressing concern within the church community. He assembles dozens of volunteers while quietly directing the search. The dentist deliberately steers people toward a particular nearby empty property, the house belonging to his recently deceased father-in-law. He proposes that a grieving woman may have gone there for peace and privacy. And suddenly, the circle is complete. Colin stays behind the scenes as others enter the garage and uncover the discovery that will come to define the investigation from that point onward. By having other people locate the scene, he separates himself from even the faintest suggestion of suspicion. Once the official investigation starts, the system reveals an astonishing absence of doubt. Detectives are given evidence appearing to point toward one conclusion. There is Leslie's recent message about wanting to sleep for an extended period. Toxicology findings show powerful sedatives were present in both Trevor and Leslie. Then investigators have the documented hospital visit after her medication overdose just weeks before. To weary detectives, the picture now seems completely accounted for. Two emotionally shattered people who could not endure public humiliation had supposedly chosen to abandon life together. One officer who personally knew all four people openly argued for a criminal investigation, yet the system selected the simplest possible course. Why make things complicated when there is a goodbye note, an obvious motive, and reports that appear to fit together so neatly? The investigation is closed with remarkable and astonishing speed, almost immediately. And when the financial result is examined, the full magnitude of the financial gain becomes impossible to overlook. Colin legally receives approximately 400,000 British pounds in insurance proceeds. Hazel collects around 200 pounds and successfully obtains a lifetime survivor's pension tied to her deceased husband. From the outside, it resembles a flawless game of chess. No suspicion, very substantial sums of money, and total freedom to move ahead. It appears that every goal has been accomplished. Yet what followed in their lives bears little resemblance to the aftermath of a crime that had supposedly succeeded. Initially, everything suggested the plan had gone exactly right. The barriers had disappeared. Huge insurance payments had landed in their bank accounts. Police had long ago closed the file and continued on. All they needed to do was enjoy the freedom they had worked so hard to secure. But this is where the story changes direction. Have you ever noticed how frequently people who commit irreversible acts eventually end up becoming responsible for their own collapse? You can deceive the justice system. You can remain ahead of detectives. But there is one thing no person can truly bargain with: their own conscience. During the first 3 years following the events of May 1991, Colin and Hazel worked hard to avoid public attention. They met only behind closed doors. Slowly, they grew more at ease being seen together in public. Yet rather than discovering happiness, their relationship soon became a catastrophe. Hazel remained weighed down by guilt. The emotional pressure never disappeared. Enduring that tension every single day kept her trapped in a constant state of anxiety. Eventually, their affair completely collapsed. After 5 difficult years spent attempting to create a future together, they ultimately chose to part company. Colin was not alone for very long. By late 1996, he met Kyle, an American student who had traveled to Northern Ireland to pursue her education. They frequently encountered one another at church, and things progressed rapidly. Only 6 months afterward, they married. Following a failed earlier marriage in the United States, Kyle wanted security and a new beginning. A well-regarded local doctor seemed to offer precisely that. From the outside, circumstances appeared to be getting better again. Colin grew his medical practice, establishing more offices and earning a substantial, reliable income. The expanding family settled into a large house and eventually bought an impressive holiday property in Florida. Together, Colin and Kyle raised 5 sons and daughters, prosperous, affluent, admired. During those years, Colin truly persuaded himself that life had rewarded him and somehow wiped away the errors of his past. But that feeling of safety would prove temporary. Now move forward 17 years. In 2008, the first crushing blow came. His eldest son, Matthew, went to Russia through a student exchange program. One day, while on an upper level of a building, Matthew tried calling to a friend below beside a stairwell. At that instant, he lost his footing and fell about 40 feet. The deadly injuries happened immediately at the scene. The tragedy devastated Colin, but one detail troubled him above everything else. According to reports, during the final moments before his fall, Matthew was desperately shouting another person's name. For Colin, that detail became an unbearable reminder. It transported him straight back to that spring night in 1991. The emotional effect was instant and devastating. Overcome by grief, he soon made a disastrous financial choice. During this fragile period, people approached him with an investment opportunity connected to the hunt for Yamashita's gold, the legendary treasure supposedly concealed in the Philippines by the Japanese military during World War II. For someone desperate for purpose and escape, the proposal seemed believable. What followed would deepen the collapse already underway. Everyone sensible around him warned against getting involved. They highlighted the obvious warning signs and said it appeared to be a textbook financial scam. Yet, blinded by the prospect of becoming a millionaire, he sent 350 British pounds to people he scarcely knew. In exchange, he got only a package holding several old coins worth barely £30 in actual value. After losing his eldest son and then surrendering a huge portion of his wealth, Colin came to one conclusion. This was not merely terrible luck. This was not simply a difficult period in life. He became certain it was direct, ruthless repayment for the secret he had concealed from the world for so many years. So return to that spring night in 1991. Just consider how coldly calculated this was. The fact that it happened on his son's birthday makes the decision even more disturbing, adding another layer to the cold calculation behind the crime. It was not an impulsive act, but something carried out with deliberate purpose and disturbing precision. Committing a double crime on his own son's birthday, on May 18th, Daniel celebrated his second birthday. Colin intentionally kept Matthew, Lauren, and Daniel awake and playing until late, so they would sleep as soundly as possible. After the house became completely silent, he grabbed a heavy hockey stick and firmly wedged it tightly against the outside of their bedroom door. Leslie slept in the living room. Already burdened by stress, she had been drinking and had taken her regular sleeping tablet that she normally used. Colin never realized that this personal habit would later prove to be the ideal advantage for him during toxicology testing. Once certain his wife was asleep, the dentist headed directly into the garage. He grabbed a plastic feeding bottle, cut it open, and turned it into a makeshift connector, attaching the exhaust pipe to a lengthy garden hose. He then started the engine and directed the hose straight toward Leslie's face. As carbon monoxide accumulated around her, Leslie struggled for breath and suddenly awoke. In sudden terror, she shouted her eldest son's name with all her strength, Matthew. That became the horrifying trigger that 17 years afterward would nearly destroy Colin emotionally. His wife's last scream would return to him through the image of his son falling from that height. Colin pinned himself over Leslie, covered her with a blanket, and physically restrained her until she stopped fighting. He then changed her clothes, concealed her in the trunk, and immediately phoned Hazel. In a composed, almost ordinary manner, he told her the first stage of their plan had been completed. Hazel confirmed the tranquilizers were already circulating inside Trevor's system. Colin then drove to the officer's house, brought the vehicle inside the garage, and again used the same hose, this time directing it into Trevor's bedroom. But Trevor awoke because of the strong smell. A savage struggle for survival began immediately. Fighting a police officer would never have been simple or easy. Yet the medication Hazel had placed into his system did precisely what Colin had anticipated. By then, dizzy and weakened, Trevor was defeated in the struggle on the bedroom floor. Hazel remained seated quietly on the couch, covering her ears with her hands. After inhaling gas throughout the fight, Colin hurried outside, desperate for some clean air. What came next was a carefully planned cleanup operation. Hazel removed crucial evidence, burning the hose inside the fireplace and laundering clothes linked directly to the night's events. Meanwhile, Colin carried both bodies to his late father-in-law's property. He positioned Trevor in the driver's seat, but the cramped space presented an obvious problem. One of Trevor's legs protruded awkwardly from the vehicle. Leslie remained hidden inside the trunk. To make the scene look more like self-harm, Colin put headphones on her and played music through them. He carefully positioned photographs around the scene and joined the exhaust system with a vacuum hose attachment, creating a believable story for investigators. He then departed the property and cycled home. Now let's return to late 2008. Broken by financial losses and devastated by the sudden death of his eldest son, Colin eventually reaches his breaking point. Deeply convinced his suffering represents some form of divine judgment, he goes before his church elders and voluntarily discloses the truth about what happened years earlier. Yet the confession goes beyond the events of that spring night. Another disturbing allegation comes forward. Colin admits that for years, he committed serious misconduct involving female patients while they were heavily sedated during dental treatment. Church leaders respond immediately. The information goes directly to the authorities. In January 2009, Colin is formally arrested, and he has no intention of bearing the consequences by himself. During his early interviews with investigators, he gives extensive details concerning Hazel's involvement. When detectives summon Hazel for questioning, she initially responds with absolute and complete denial. She dismisses every allegation entirely. Yet after realizing investigators have detailed statements and considerable information supplied by her former partner, her approach changes completely. She now portrays herself as a terrified and helpless victim. She says she spent years afraid for her own safety, as well as the safety of her sons and daughters. Hazel maintains that Colin's threats compelled her to remain silent. But honestly, that account leaves some uncomfortable questions unresolved. No one compelled her to clean away evidence associated with the struggle. No one made her burn physical evidence inside the fireplace, and no one forced her to help conceal what occurred while her husband's body was being transported elsewhere. To many observers, the victim story appeared less like an explanation and more like an effort to protect her reputation and liberty. Eventually, the legal system brings the case to its final conclusion. In November 2010, the court sentences Colin to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 21 years before becoming eligible for parole. Hazel's trial occurs in March of the following year. The prosecution's principal witness is Colin himself. While testifying under oath, he says he is coming forward to ease his conscience and finally reveal the truth. The jury needs little time to decide. After about 2 hours of deliberation, they dismiss Hazel's version and deliver a guilty verdict. She receives life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. Ultimately, the picture of the flawless family falls apart completely. Kyle, the American woman who had created a life alongside Colin, discovers the complete truth about the man she had shared her home with. She promptly files for divorce and permanently returns to the United States. Among the 9 sons and daughters born from Colin's 2 marriages, only one daughter is reportedly prepared to keep any kind of contact with him today. What makes this so striking is the extraordinary length of time appearances concealed reality. For years, a respected professional, trusted church member, and devoted father successfully persuaded police, congregation members, friends, and relatives that everything was precisely what it appeared to be. Beneath that carefully preserved image existed a degree of calculation that stayed concealed until the burden of the truth ultimately became impossible to bear completely. Monday, April 26, 2010, started like every other school day for 16-year-old Ollie Lowitzer. She departed home around 6:15 that morning, carrying her backpack and cell phone before traveling to Spring High School in Spring, Texas. Nothing about the day appeared strange. She attended classes, socialized with friends, and texted her mom throughout the day. After school, Ollie took her regular bus home. During the trip, she asked her mother whether she could stop at Burger Barn, the restaurant where she had recently begun working. She wanted to collect her paycheck and find out whether they needed assistance that evening. Her mother wasn't comfortable with the idea. The restaurant was only about half a mile from home, but the path followed a busy road without sidewalks. Even so, Ollie continued asking. Eventually, her mom agreed, telling her to stay cautious and text once she arrived. At 2:57 that afternoon, Ollie got off the school bus at her normal stop. Rather than heading toward home, she walked in the opposite direction toward Burger Barn. She texted several friends while walking, attempting to arrange plans for later that evening if she didn't need to work. Then, the messages abruptly stopped. Ollie never arrived at Burger Barn. She never made it home, and nobody has ever confirmed seeing her afterward. Alexandria Joy Ollie Lowitzer was born on February 3, 1994. She resided with her mother and older brother in Spring, Texas. Like most teenagers, she had numerous interests that occupied her life. She loved drawing. She liked singing. She had recently begun learning guitar. Softball was among her greatest passions, and she played catcher for her school team. She also joined Girl Scouts and enjoyed spending time with close friends. While she could be quiet around unfamiliar people, Ollie became lively and conversational once she felt comfortable. She had a distinctive style, frequently wearing dark eye makeup and expressing herself through her artwork. Several months before disappearing, Ollie had begun dating a boy named DJ. She had also recently landed her first job at Burger Barn. Making her own paycheck gave her a sense of independence, and she was eager to have greater responsibility. Like many teenagers in 2010, Ollie spent considerable time texting friends. Her phone wasn't a smartphone. It could place calls and send text messages, but it lacked internet access. She maintained MySpace and Facebook accounts, but she seldom used them. Her parents had separated the previous year, and although the family was still adapting, they remained close. In fact, Ollie and her father had recently started rebuilding their relationship. Nothing indicated she intended to disappear. She had upcoming softball games. She had employment. She had friends. She had a boyfriend. She had plans ahead. After leaving the bus, Ollie started the brief walk toward Burger Barn. The journey should have taken only 15 or 20 minutes. As she walked, she kept texting several friends, including DJ. Then, right around 3 p.m., every conversation ended. No goodbye, no explanation, no final text. Just silence. As the afternoon went on, Ollie's mother grew increasingly worried. She had expected a message saying Ollie had safely reached the restaurant. Nothing arrived. Initially, she thought Ollie had begun working and simply forgot to answer. Around 9 o'clock that night, she drove to Burger Barn to collect her daughter. The restaurant had already closed. The lights were extinguished. Employees had left. Ollie had never shown up. Panic swiftly replaced hope. Her mother called friends and relatives, but nobody had seen her. DJ said they had been texting until shortly after Ollie left the bus. Afterward, nothing.
Later that evening, Ollie was reported missing. From the beginning, Ollie's family faced a major obstacle.
Hollis thought she had merely run away. Since she was 16 years old,
investigators didn't immediately treat the case as a possible abduction. Her parents strongly disagreed.
This wasn't like Ollie. This is the part
that gets hard.
Because it's not good when you think.
Because it's not good when you think.
And you think that somebody took them. The thoughts that run through your mind are not good. But she pushes those thoughts away and draws strength from the renewed effort to locate Ollie.
The thoughts that go through your head are not good.
But she pushes those thoughts aside and gains strength from the renewed effort to find Allie.
Even so, precious time was lost. Her family started searching independently. They talked with classmates, friends, teachers, workers at Burger Barn. Everyone offered the same response.
Her family began searching on their own. They spoke with classmates, friends, teachers, employees at Burger Barn. Everyone gave the same answer. Nobody had seen
towers around 3 p.m., almost immediately after she exited the bus. Then the phone was powered off. It has never been switched on again. As word spread, tips started coming in. One delivery driver reported seeing a teenage girl speaking with someone inside a white pickup truck. Initially, investigators questioned whether it could be Ollie. Later, they established it wasn't. Another lead concerned a co-worker from Burger Barn who had reportedly expressed interest in Ollie. Investigators examined him. Nothing tied him to the disappearance. Rumors also spread about the restaurant's owner making young employees uneasy. Again, no evidence connected him to Ollie's case. Another student reported being approached by strangers in a Monte Carlo. Around the same period, Ollie vanished. She escaped unharmed, but investigators couldn't tie the incident to Ollie. Years afterward, convicted murderer Brandon Lever became another person of interest because he drove a white truck and had relatives living nearby. After verifying his whereabouts, investigators eliminated him. A private investigator even pursued a trafficking lead that went to Ohio. The girl discovered there wasn't Ollie. Although the search rescued several trafficking victims, it offered no answers regarding Ollie. Every promising lead ultimately arrived at the same conclusion: nothing. Without evidence, multiple theories remain. The first involves a stranger abduction. Ollie vanished during a brief walk along a busy roadway. There was one secluded stretch with few nearby structures, making it possible someone forced her into a vehicle without drawing attention. Another theory proposes someone she knew could have been involved. Years later, one friend claimed Ollie had mentioned speaking with an older man. Investigators never uncovered evidence backing that statement, but it remains part of the discussion. The runaway theory has mostly been rejected. Nothing in Ollie's behavior suggested she intended to leave forever. She left essential belongings behind and had future plans involving friends, work, and school. Human trafficking has also been examined because Houston's location lies near major highways. However, investigators have never uncovered evidence placing Ollie within any trafficking network. Another possibility involves a hit and run. Since Ollie was walking beside a busy roadway while texting, some believe she could have been hit by a vehicle. If that occurred, the driver might have panicked and concealed what happened. There is no evidence confirming this theory either. More than a decade afterward, every explanation remains merely a possibility. Despite the passing years, Ollie's family has never ceased searching.
Ollie's family has never stopped looking. Her mother became an advocate for missing persons and worked closely
with families experiencing similar tragedies.
She created the Hope for
campaign and continues spreading awareness through websites, social media, and public events. Each year, Ollie's story gets shared again in hopes someone recalls something. Even one minor detail could change everything. Today, Ollie Lowitzer is still missing. She was 16 years old when she disappeared on April 26, 2010. She stood approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed around 140 pounds. She had brown hair, hazel eyes, braces, and had recently dyed her hair a dark red shade. The last confirmed sighting occurred when she stepped off her school bus, carrying a colorful backpack and dressed in dark clothing. She was heading toward Burger Barn. She never got there. More than a decade afterward, one question remains unanswered. What happened to Ollie Lowitzer? A teenage bedroom should be a private and peaceful sanctuary. Yet on a bitter November morning in 2016, that sense of safety vanished forever. A 16-year-old girl slept soundly in her bed, while her family quietly rested only a short distance down the hall. There was no forced entrance, no shattered locks, no footsteps ascending the stairs. Instead, a single 9mm bullet tore through an exterior wooden wall, striking its target in the complete darkness of night with horrifying accuracy. In a split second, a secure suburban family house suddenly became an execution chamber. Knoxville, Tennessee, lies nestled among the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains, a sprawling and busy city that somehow maintains a close-knit small-town character. In the area's affluent, peaceful subdivisions, daily life centers on Friday night football games, school pride, and strong family ties. This was the close-knit world inhabited by 16-year-old Emma Jane Walker. Born in 2000, Emma was the sort of teenager who effortlessly attracted people around her. She carried a radiant, nearly electric energy wherever she went. With her bright blonde hair and ever-present smile, she embodied the image of the popular American cheerleader. Yet anyone who knew her realized she was much more than a high school stereotype. Emma was intensely driven, with a keen intellect and a profoundly compassionate heart. On weekends, she volunteered at nearby animal shelters. Fueled by a lifelong goal of becoming a neonatal nurse, she hoped to devote her life to caring for premature infants, reflecting her nurturing nature and her wish to safeguard the most vulnerable. Her parents, Mark and Jill Walker, created a secure, affectionate home. They brought up Emma and her older brother, emphasizing respect, boundaries, and diligent work. Emma was an honor student at Central High School, successfully juggling the demanding routine of competitive cheerleading with challenging academic coursework. Her bedroom perfectly mirrored her lively personality and spirit. Its walls were covered with photos of friends, cheer ribbons, and keepsakes from a happy, sheltered adolescence. To an outside observer, Emma's life appeared to be suburban perfection. She was steadily heading toward a bright, carefully mapped-out future. She had the ambition, and the unwavering backing of a family who adored her. During the fall of 14, as a high school freshman, Emma encountered a junior named William Riley Gall. Riley, who used his middle name, was precisely the sort of boy who effortlessly attracted notice at a southern high school. At 18, he was broad-shouldered and played wide receiver for the Central High School Bobcats football team. Riley was courteous, quiet-spoken, and popular among his classmates and coaches. Raised in a religious household, he attended church regularly and appeared to represent the model of a student athlete. For a 14-year-old freshman, receiving attention from an older, well-known varsity football player was deeply flattering. Their early interactions seemed completely ordinary. They traded messages, chatted in the hallways between classes, and spent time together at school functions. From the outside, Emma and Riley looked like the quintessential high school power couple, the cheerleader paired with the football player. They made their relationship official, and it soon became the focal point of both their worlds. Riley seemed intensely devoted, showing up at Emma's cheer competitions, giving her presents, and repeatedly declaring his affection. Initially, that much attention felt reassuring. It felt like love. Yet underneath the surface of this apparently perfect teenage romance, something subtle was starting to change. Riley's devotion did not come from mutual respect. Instead, it grew from an intense, increasingly troubling desire to possess. Emma wanted a partner who could share in her energetic life, while Riley wanted someone he could entirely consume. Behind his reserved, courteous exterior, he concealed profound insecurity and an unstable temperament. As an athlete, he was used to exercising control on the field, and gradually he began transferring that same expectation of control into his relationship with Emma. The change from a caring boyfriend into an overwhelming presence was not immediate. Rather, it was a slow tightening of control, steadily wearing away Emma's independence while disguising itself as romantic concern. Early on, the relationship between the teenagers resembled the familiar high school story. Cheerful, highly visible, and extensively chronicled across social media. They went to dances together, shared seats in the bleachers, and seemed virtually inseparable. Yet the public image of their flawless romance was a deliberately built facade, one Riley carefully preserved while privately stripping away Emma's autonomy behind closed doors. The shift from affectionate partner to suffocating captor did not arrive through one sudden, explosive incident. Instead, it unfolded as a calculated, gradual campaign of isolation. It started with a digital leash. Riley expected uninterrupted communication, demanding instant answers to his texts no matter where Emma happened to be or what she happened to be doing. One missed call or slow response could trigger a flood of accusations. He demanded access to her social media passwords, keeping watch over her private conversations while presenting it as complete transparency. He would comb through her phone, scrutinizing her exchanges with classmates, and looking for any imagined insult or danger to his complete control over her attention. Whenever she talked with another male student, even if it was merely a passing hello in the hallway, Riley questioned her aggressively, with his jealousy building into a restrained but powerful anger. His desire for control soon extended beyond the digital world and into her physical life. He started controlling what she wore, showing intense displeasure whenever he considered a dress excessively short or a cheerleading uniform overly revealing. He pushed her to change her clothing, manipulating her by insisting that his demands came from respect and protection. Emma, at first interpreting his possessiveness as passionate loyalty, attempted to satisfy him. She changed how she behaved, trying to make herself smaller so she could fit the narrow, inflexible shape he was creating for her. Yet Emma was naturally strong-willed. Over the months and then years, the suffocating nature of their relationship grew impossible to overlook. Constant monitoring and unfounded accusations ignited fierce, draining arguments. The pattern soon became painfully predictable. A crushing demand, an ugly confrontation, then Riley delivering tearful apologies and lavish promises that he would change. He bought her presents, composed long letters declaring devotion, and insisted that his conduct was simply a result of how profoundly he cared about her. People closest to them started noticing the troubling currents beneath the surface. Emma's friends watched her bright spirit fade, and her once carefree confidence seemed to disappear beneath the relentless pressure of his constant demands. The girl who had once been the heart of every gathering now seemed frequently nervous, checking her phone over and over, frightened that she might provoke another of Riley's brooding moods. Her parents, Mark and Jill, watched the poisonous pattern unfold with growing alarm. They recognized the familiar warning signs of emotional abuse and manipulation. They saw what it was doing to their daughter's mental well-being. The fatigue around her eyes, the abrupt mood changes, the manner in which she appeared perpetually afraid to make a mistake inside her own home. Mark and Jill intervened, trying to build a shield of protection around their daughter. They established firm limits, forbidding Riley from their property and limiting Emma's chances to meet him beyond school hours. Sometimes they even took away her phone, accepting the blame themselves simply to give their daughter several hours of quiet, free from Riley's non-stop digital barrage. By fall 2016, Emma had finally reached her breaking point. She was now a high school junior, concentrating on her future, academics, and friends. She understood the relationship was a sinking vessel and at last found the courage to sever the anchor. She formally broke things off, making it unmistakably clear to Riley that their relationship had ended, and she wanted no further contact with him. For an ordinary teenager, ending a relationship is a painful yet necessary rite of passage. To Riley, it represented an intolerable surrender of control. He would not accept the rejection. Instead, he convinced himself the breakup was unreal. Emma was merely confused, and he could compel her into submission again. His conduct quickly changed from poisonous boyfriend to persistent stalker. After Emma blocked his number, he turned to apps that created fake numbers, flooding her with hundreds of texts each day. When she refused to respond, he turned guilt into a weapon. He started threatening suicide, sending grim, manipulative messages implying he could not live without her. He waited outside her workplace, left his car near her neighborhood, and discovered ways to repeatedly invade her physical space. Emma had stopped dating Riley, yet she remained completely trapped by him. Their high school romance was over, leaving a volatile, fixated young man prepared to take frightening measures to establish that if he could not possess her, nobody else could. By mid-November 2016, temperatures across East Tennessee had plunged into the freezing 30s, while another sort of coldness was spreading through Emma's life. Riley was beginning to understand that his non-stop digital attacks and emotional pressure were no longer effective. The separation was holding. Without control, his fixation transformed into something much more perilous, a fabricated reality. If guilt could not bring her back, he would attempt to bring her back through terror. He needed to construct a situation in which Emma faced absolute danger, an emergency that only he could resolve. He was transforming from rejected boyfriend into an invented savior. The mental torment started several days ahead of Thanksgiving break. Emma's phone buzzed repeatedly with a series of threatening text messages from an unknown, untraceable number. The sender claimed Riley had been kidnapped. The threatening digital messages sternly ordered the 16-year-old girl to obey their instructions if she ever hoped to see her former boyfriend alive again. The anonymous caller demanded that she walk outside her house by herself. Rather than obeying the frightening command, Emma immediately reached out to mutual friends, asking them to verify Riley's whereabouts. They discovered him completely unharmed, relaxing inside his college dorm room. It required no experienced investigator to determine where those disturbing messages had originated. The poorly staged threat was Riley's first false flag attempt, a desperate effort to make Emma interact with him. Yet the performance was soon going to develop from a minor digital annoyance into a real-world nightmare. Friday, November 18th, Emma remained home alone. Her parents had gone out for the evening, leaving her inside the quiet suburban family house. Just before midnight, the peaceful quiet suddenly broke apart. Loud, vicious pounding reverberated against the front door. This was no ordinary knock, but the forceful hammering of someone attempting to splinter the wooden door. Emma moved cautiously toward the front entrance, her heart pounding inside her chest, and looked through the window. On her porch stood a tall person completely dressed in black, his face entirely hidden beneath a dark hood. The stranger violently shook the heavy brass doorknob, testing the locks. Emma retreated, surrounded by a surge of icy fear. She barricaded herself inside her bedroom and desperately started texting anyone still awake, begging them for assistance. In a suspiciously convenient turn of events, Riley happened to be nearby. He reached the property with questionable speed. Riley texted her, saying he had courageously pursued the black-clad intruder into the nearby woods. Outside her home, he played the part of the protective rescuer, waiting for her to unlock the door and run into his arms. Emma, however, stayed locked inside. When her mother, Jill, returned home soon afterward, she discovered Riley lingering across the front lawn. Police officers were promptly sent to the residence. As responding officers questioned the college student, they noticed his composed demeanor. He displayed no evidence of exertion, no labored breathing, no dirt on his shoes, and none of the adrenaline tremors expected after running through dense brush in pitch-black darkness. Seeing his presence as a blatant breach of their firmly established boundaries, Jill told Riley to leave the property. The supposed hero had failed to get inside. Saturday, November 19th, under 24 hours later, Riley intensified his theatrical performance. This time, he portrayed himself as the completely helpless victim. That morning, his college roommates reported him missing. They informed campus security that they were unable to locate him and that his vehicle remained behind. Alarms spread through their social circles until much later that afternoon, when a passerby noticed Riley wandering aimlessly down an isolated section of rural highway, miles away from campus. Sheriff's deputies found him beside a shallow drainage ditch, looking deeply confused when they arrived to investigate. Riley gave the officers an extremely detailed but seriously flawed account of events. He told them unknown men had ambushed him at his car, forcibly pulled him into a mysterious van, and transported him to an undisclosed location. The investigators listened quietly and carefully, yet the holes in his account were enormous and increasingly impossible to overlook. Although Riley claimed he had been kidnapped and abandoned in the wilderness, his clothing remained perfectly spotless. There were no defensive injuries, bruises, or scratches anywhere on his body, despite the violence he claimed to have endured. The strong smell of wet fall leaves filled the air, but his shoes remained completely dry. When questioned about the abductors or their van, his recollection conveniently faded into hazy, meaningless descriptions. Officials quickly understood what they were dealing with: a massive drain on valuable police resources and an obvious, deliberate false lead that had sent investigators in the wrong direction. Once Emma learned about the alleged kidnapping, she felt absolutely no sympathy. The combination of the anonymous messages, the black hooded figure, and the strange roadside abduction now formed one unmistakable conclusion. She told her closest friends that she believed Riley had staged the entire chain of events solely to manipulate her feelings and make her speak with him. Through intermediaries, she made it unmistakably clear that she understood his entire act. His psychological hold was completely gone. Riley's frantic, staged efforts to become her rescuer had not merely failed. They had driven her even farther away. With his methods of manipulation stripped away and complete rejection staring him in the face, his invented emergencies disappeared. The performance was finally, completely and unmistakably ending now. All that remained was a simmering, unstable obsession and one final, horrifying realization. If he could no longer play the savior, he would take on the role of the executioner. The weekend ended as a sharp cold settled across Knoxville. In the early morning hours of Monday, November 21st, 2016, temperatures had dropped into the low 30s Fahrenheit. Within the Walker home, things were finally quiet. The draining drama of recent days, the anonymous threats, the black-hooded prowler, the staged kidnapping, seemed to have completely disappeared. Emma was worn out. She had spent Sunday evening speaking with friends, firmly repeating that she was entirely finished with Riley Gall. Her limits were clear. She entered her ground floor bedroom, changed into soft sleepwear, and got into bed. Sleep came quickly. Her bed sat tightly in the room's corner, directly against the house's outer wooden wall. The home went dark. The suburban road became completely silent. Outside, frost started forming harder across the grass. Sometime during the pitch-black early morning, someone approached the side of the Walker house. There was no effort to defeat the locks, no struggle with windows, no intention of facing the victim directly. This was not a passionate crime carried out during a heated shouting match. It was a deliberate, calculated killing. The attacker stood in the freezing yard, looking toward the plain outer wall of Emma's bedroom. He knew the room's exact arrangement. He knew precisely where the bed sat. He understood the height and exact angle necessary. In the darkness, he lifted a 9mm handgun. He carefully aimed at the point where a sleeping girl's head rested against the drywall. He squeezed the trigger. The 9mm blast ripped through the suburban silence. Barely a second afterward, another shot cracked through the night. The mechanics of the attack were horrifyingly exact. The thick copper-jacketed rounds tore through the vinyl siding, shattered the wooden frame, and pierced the inner drywall instantly. One round went wide, lodging harmlessly inside the room. The second reached its intended target with chilling precision. The bullet hit the 16-year-old girl directly behind her left ear as she slept deeply. There was no opportunity to respond, no moment to feel fear or pain. Emma Walker's life was over within a fraction of a second. Her promising future was snuffed out inside the dark refuge of her bedroom. Outside, the gunman lowered his weapon. He turned away and disappeared into the freezing darkness, leaving nothing visible across the lawn, escaping before the neighborhood had even fully understood the sharp reports ringing down the streets. Inside, the gunfire had briefly awakened Emma's mother, Jill. She shifted in bed, confused by the abrupt, piercing sounds. Yet through the fog of the early morning, she found an ordinary explanation for the noise. She thought a heavy door might have slammed somewhere inside the house, or maybe a sizable piece of furniture had toppled over. Soon, the home returned to complete silence. Believing her children were secure and sleeping in their beds, Jill shut her eyes and fell asleep again. Several hours afterward, sunlight rose beyond the horizon, spilling pale gray morning light across the neighborhood. It was about 6 a.m. The Walker home started stirring for an ordinary Monday morning. Morning routines began. Jill realized Emma was still asleep. Her daughter was normally dependable about her morning routine, requiring ample time to prepare for school and cheerleading practice. Jill walked along the hallway toward Emma's ground floor bedroom. She opened the door. The room was silent, unnaturally silent. Emma lay in her bed, facing away from the doorway, apparently still asleep. Jill entered and softly spoke her daughter's name. There was no answer. She moved closer to the bed and reached down, gently shaking Emma's leg in an attempt to wake her. The terrible truth of the scene suddenly destroyed the morning. Her daughter's skin felt icy beneath her touch. The 16-year-old did not respond at all. With panic tightening her throat, Jill desperately scanned the room, struggling to comprehend what seemed impossible. Then she detected the faint metallic odor lingering in the stale air, mingling with the dry, powdery smell of shattered drywall. She noticed the small, uneven holes punched through the wall immediately above the mattress. The mother's terrified screams violently tore through the entire house that morning. The desperate, heartbreaking 911 call came in at 6:30 a.m., but there was nothing the paramedics could possibly do. Emma was already gone. First responders who reached the property encountered a scene of utter devastation. The contrast of the setting was deeply disturbing. Cheerleading ribbons decorated the walls, photos of smiling teenagers covered corkboards, and the ordinary clutter belonging to a high school student's life remained everywhere, all set against the grim reality of a homicide investigation. Detectives immediately studied the bullet hole's trajectory. Their angles revealed unmistakable evidence of premeditation. The shooter had not simply fired randomly toward a house. Instead, they had established a kill zone from outside, exploiting the victim's predictable sleeping routine against her. The investigation was officially underway, and Knoxville police faced a horrifying mystery. Who would remain outside in the freezing darkness simply to kill a teenage girl through the walls of her own house? In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, the Knox County Sheriff's Office confronted a complicated forensic puzzle. Bright yellow crime scene tape surrounded the suburban property, creating a harsh, unnatural contrast against the neatly maintained lawns and peaceful driveways nearby. Detectives and crime scene technicians began carefully reconstructing the geometry of the killing. Their work began outside. The frozen lawn offered almost no physical evidence. There were no deep boot marks, discarded objects, or indications of any struggle. Yet in the frost, only a few feet from the exterior wall, investigators discovered 2 spent 9mm shell casings. Investigators examined the bullet entry points in the vinyl siding. By placing trajectory rods through the bullet holes and using laser levels, they charted the precise path taken by the projectiles. The findings ruled out whatever remaining possibility there might have been of an accidental tragedy. The early dead ends reflected the familiar difficulties surrounding suburban homicide cases. Since nobody had forced entry, detectives initially had to determine whether the shots came from a random drive-by attack or celebratory gunfire that had taken a horrifying turn. But the laser measurements told another story. The trajectory rods angled slightly downward, showing that the shooter had been standing extremely close to the house, holding the weapon around chest height and firing downward with precision into the corner where the bed sat. This was no stray round, it was a deliberate assassination. The killer knew the home's arrangement, knew precisely where the victim slept, and had the chilling calmness necessary to carry out the plan under cover of darkness. As daylight finally spread across the area, the tragedy's social impact began rippling throughout Knoxville. Word of the sudden killing traveled quickly through Central High School's hallways. One vacant desk in a morning classroom soon became a source of widespread panic. School administrators delivered a solemn announcement, while grief counselors were sent in immediately. Yet beneath the overwhelming grief was an unmistakable current of fear. The community was stunned by the possibility that an unknown sniper might be hunting teenagers in their beds. Parents hurried to secure their doors, cancel after-school activities, and keep their children home from school. Rumors circulated wildly, with theories involving gang initiations or a neighborhood prowler only intensifying the community's growing paranoia. The town demanded answers, and the strain on law enforcement was enormous. As the community grew frightened, detectives started methodically eliminating people from the victim's inner circle. They had to question relatives, friends, and naturally, her former boyfriend. Investigators already knew about the volatile history between the teenagers. Emma's mother had told responding officers about the suffocating relationship, their recent separation, and the strange theatrical incidents that unfolded over the previous weekend. The anonymous threatening messages, the black-clad man pounding on the door, and the widely publicized staged kidnapping. To experienced homicide detectives, those incidents were unmistakable warning signs. The staged episodes suggested a psychological profile of someone desperately losing control and trying to manipulate his way back into a position of authority. Yet while police assembled their timeline, the leading suspect was already building his own alibi before the public. Riley Gall turned to social media and staged an elaborate, disturbing display of grief. He uploaded a lengthy tribute expressing his overwhelming devastation. He described how deeply he loved her, insisting she was in a better place, and that he would never forget the memories they had made together. He wrote a sprawling, multi-paragraph tribute to her beauty and spirit, finishing his online declaration by saying he loved her more than anything. This public mourning was a carefully calculated facade. It sought to control the story, presenting him as the devastated survivor instead of the person behind the tragedy. He was exploiting the community's sympathy. When detectives brought the college freshman into the interrogation room, they watched his behavior carefully. The young man sat across from them, projecting an air of subdued grief. Following a routine, non-confrontational method, investigators asked him to describe his weekend and account for his whereabouts on the night of the shooting. He told detectives he was devastated by the recent breakup, though he was attempting to move forward. He claimed that on the night at issue, he was safely inside his college dormitory, sleeping soundly and entirely unaware of the horror taking place miles away. He acted completely shocked when discussing her death, holding steady eye contact while giving courteous, cooperative answers. He presented himself as an innocent victim of circumstance, a grieving young man trapped inside a nightmare. Investigators listened patiently, recording his alibi without immediately showing what evidence they possessed. They knew his timeline was weak, but to crack a suspect so committed to his performance, they required conclusive physical evidence connecting him to the 9 mm casings discovered in the frozen grass. The investigation's turning point arrived quickly, brought not by a crime laboratory, but through another police report filed during the weekend. While reviewing records, detectives uncovered a report concerning a stolen firearm. The missing gun belonged to the suspect's grandfather. He had told police that his 9 mm Glock pistol was stolen from his vehicle only days before the shooting. The theft happened during the same period when the suspect was frantically intensifying his stalking behavior, right around the fake kidnapping and prowler incident. Suddenly, the pieces fit together with frightening clarity. The stolen gun's caliber matched the shell casings recovered at the crime scene. Detectives realized the suspect had not merely staged a kidnapping to win sympathy. He had exploited the weekend's chaos as cover to obtain a murder weapon. The evidence now pointed toward one increasingly troubling conclusion. The same young man who had staged the earlier incidents appeared to be connected to the weapon, the shell casings, and the planned attack on Emma. His alibi was starting to crumble. The devastated boyfriend persona was buckling beneath the growing weight of circumstantial evidence. The appearance of a grieving former boyfriend was becoming harder to sustain as more pieces of the case pointed in one direction. Investigators could clearly see the pressure mounting with every new discovery in the case. Yet suspecting someone is guilty and proving that guilt inside a courtroom are two entirely separate challenges. The firearm remained missing. The suspect continued clinging to his dormitory alibi. Police were convinced they had identified their killer, but they needed the weapon for a conviction. If he succeeded in getting rid of the 9mm Glock before investigators recovered it, the physical connection binding him to the killing would disappear. The case changed from a search for facts into an urgent, high-stakes pursuit of the firearm, and detectives were soon going to receive assistance from the least expected people. A crucial break emerged within the suspect's own circle. Two college freshmen, Alex McCarty and Noah Walton, were confronting a horrifying realization. They had spent the preceding days around the supposedly heartbroken boyfriend, yet his private conduct openly clashed with the grief he displayed publicly. He was extremely restless, pacing around his dormitory and fixating on forensic science. Eventually, he asked Alex how to thoroughly remove fingerprints from a textured metal surface. More incriminating still, he admitted he possessed the missing firearm, concocting a frantic story that he had taken it only for protection from the imaginary kidnappers involved that weekend. The two friends began connecting the pieces. They understood their companion was not a traumatized victim, but a dangerous threat working to conceal his involvement. Showing remarkable moral courage, Alex and Noah made a frightening decision. They went directly to the Knox County Sheriff's Office. They told lead investigators that the suspect still possessed the stolen pistol and was actively planning to toss it into the river. Detectives understood this might be their sole opportunity. If the gun disappeared beneath the deep, swift waterways of East Tennessee, the physical evidence connecting the perpetrator with the killing could be lost permanently. Investigators designed a dangerous sting operation. They brought the two college students into a secured room and fitted them with hidden transmitters. Wires were secured flat across their chests. Small microphones were carefully hidden beneath the heavy material of their winter coats. The plan carried obvious danger. Two inexperienced teenagers were about to enter a confined moving vehicle with a desperate, trapped man who had already shown he was willing to kill someone in cold blood. Darkness fell. The undercover operation began. Alex and Noah met the suspect at an agreed location. They entered his vehicle. Inside the cramped cabin, the air seemed unbearably heavy with silent tension. Beneath their thick coats, the transmitters quietly hummed, carrying every painful second of audio to several unmarked police vehicles, following miles behind through the complete darkness. The suspect drove along dark, twisting country roads toward a remote wooded bluff overlooking the Tennessee River. Throughout the painfully slow journey, the concealed microphones recorded precisely what prosecutors needed. The suspect spoke in an unsettling, emotionless calm. He explained the exact steps of their assignment, describing how his friends would help him throw the heavy item into the deepest portion of the current. The recording contained no hint of grief. There was no sadness for the girl whose life had ended only 48 hours earlier. Instead, there was the detached, methodical thinking of a predator desperate to protect himself. They arrived at the chosen dumping location. The vehicle's tires ground to a stop across the frozen gravel. The suspect shifted the car into park. He reached beneath the darkness under the passenger seat. He drew out a black plastic garbage bag. Within the rustling plastic lay the stolen pistol, a pair of black gloves, and a thick black hoodie. He seized the car door handle. He readied himself to leave the vehicle into the freezing air and head toward the water's edge. He never reached the riverbank. The complete darkness of the gravel lot suddenly vanished. Brilliant white floodlights erupted from every direction, bathing the bare tree line in daylight-like brightness. The abrupt, thunderous roar of powerful engines bounced off the bluffs as unmarked police cruisers rushed forward, boxing the suspect's vehicle inside a steel barricade. Heavily armed tactical officers flooded the perimeter. Orders were shouted through amplified bullhorns. The suspect went rigid. The careful calm he had preserved for days disappeared beneath the blinding wash of police lights. The black plastic bag fell from his hand. It struck the floorboards with a heavy, metallic bang. Officers dragged him from the driver's seat. They forced him face down onto the freezing pavement. Steel handcuffs locked around his wrists with a sharp, final click. The carefully built performance of the grieving college athlete completely disintegrated, leaving only the frightened reality of a captured fugitive. The weapon was recovered without one shot being fired. The sting operation had worked perfectly, securing the physical evidence required to make certain the architect behind this tragedy would never again control another human being. The Knox County courtroom provided no platform for theatrics. Once the trial began, the defense tried to frame the killing as a tragic, unintended accident. They claimed the defendant had only meant to scare his ex-girlfriend by shooting into the dark house, hoping she would become frightened and return to him for protection. A reckless stunt had turned terribly wrong. Yet the physical evidence could not be overcome. Prosecutors carefully tore apart the accident theory. They showed the jury the trajectory mapping, proving how the weapon had been pressed directly against the exterior vinyl siding and angled precisely downward, aimed at the exact corner where the victim slept. It was a frightening calculation, entirely free of panic or mistake. The audio recorded during the sting operation ultimately determined his fate. The jury sat in complete silence as the former athlete calmly planned to discard the stolen firearm. Showing no remorse whatsoever for the life he had ended only 48 hours earlier, his own recorded words completely destroyed the image of the devastated survivor. The jury deliberated shortly before delivering its verdict. Guilty on every charge, including first-degree murder. He received a mandatory life sentence, guaranteeing he would never again manipulate or wield authority over another human being. Although the gavel's strike brought legal closure, it could never replace the permanent void left behind. The tragedy changed the local community forever, taking away the innocence of suburban adolescents. A bright, compassionate future was destroyed by someone who believed that if he could not completely possess another person, that person simply could not exist. A final, bleak and sobering reminder that extreme control is never, under any circumstances, an expression of genuine, healthy, lasting love or devotion. September 2009, in the little Mississippi Delta town of Cary, another morning was getting underway. Yet inside a house beside Highway 61, something unthinkable had already occurred. 31-year-old Kareth Carroll and her 3-year-old daughter, Jama, had been savagely killed. Someone had entered the residence. Someone had ended their lives. And over 16 years later, one question remains unanswered. Who killed Kartha and Jamea? I tell the story of Karetha and Jamea Carroll, who were killed inside their home in Cary, Mississippi in September 2009. Despite years of probing and several arrests, their family continues waiting for justice. This is their story. In 2009, under 300 residents called Cary, Mississippi home. Set in the heart of the Mississippi Delta, Cary is the sort of town where people know each other by name. Families have remained there for generations, neighbors watch over one another, and news rarely stays private for long. It's the sort of place where a violent crime doesn't simply affect one family, it reaches an entire community. So, when word circulated that a young mother and her 3-year-old daughter had been discovered dead inside their house, the shock traveled far beyond the walls of that home and into the surrounding community. For those who knew Kartha Carroll and her daughter Jama, it was nearly impossible to grasp. And as investigators started seeking answers, they found themselves working to unravel a case that would turn out to be more complicated than anyone first imagined. But to fully grasp the weight of what was lost in that house on Highway 61, you have to know who Kartha Carroll was before that Tuesday night. In a small town like Cary, Mississippi, where the population barely reaches a few hundred people, everybody has a reputation. And Kar's reputation was built through her work ethic and her dedication as a mother. Her mother, Verta Carroll, always portrayed Karita as an exceptionally easygoing person. She wasn't someone who sought trouble or carried grudges. She was the sort of person who naturally connected with everyone she encountered. But beneath that mild manner was a deeply responsible, self-reliant woman. She brought up her 3 children with a protective firmness that shaped her life. Her youngest, Jama, was just 3 years old, lovingly nicknamed China by her family. And she was described as a kind, bright little girl. Now, to provide for her family, Kartha worked at the Double Quick convenience store in nearby Rolling Fork. Kar's strong roots in Cherokee County meant that she understood how the Delta functioned, and she knew the dangers of living beside a major transportation route like Highway 61. Those close to the family also pointed out
along a major transit vein like Highway 61.
Karetha was careful. She never gambled with her personal safety and certainly wouldn't unlock her door for just anybody, particularly during the late hours at all. Although much of Kar's private life stayed out of the public eye, people who knew her have provided a handful of personal details over the years. Her closest friend said Kartha was seeing a man named Kevin when she died that morning. Aside from that, very little information has surfaced publicly about their relationship or the time they spent together. Reports further indicate that Keitha shared parenting responsibilities with Jamea's father, who lived close by. Although the pair were no longer together romantically, they continued taking part in raising their daughter. By every account, Kareth's world in September 2009 revolved mainly around her job, caring for her children, and those nearest to her. Nothing indicates that people around her thought she faced any immediate threat, or that anything unusual had been taking place during the days before her death. Then, on Tuesday night, September 22, 2009, the lights above the South Delta Middle School football field shone brightly. Delta humidity hung heavily in the air alongside the unified roar of a close-knit community. And somewhere in the stands, said Kartha, she wasn't merely there to watch. She was shouting as loudly as she could for her son playing on the field. Later that evening, Kartha and her daughter went back to their home on Highway 61. Her two older children were staying close by with their grandmother, leaving only Kareth and Jamaica together inside the house that night. For her relatives and friends, Kartha had always been a steady anchor. She was dependable, diligent, and a mother whose entire life revolved around her three children. Anyone who knew Kartha understood that she didn't take shortcuts, and she certainly never skipped work. So when Kar didn't show up for her shift at the Double Q convenience store the next morning, it immediately stood out to everyone who knew her well. People familiar with her said that behavior was completely unlike her. As the hours passed without anyone managing to contact her, uneasiness rapidly became alarm. By mid-morning, Kar's uncle, Tony Stamps, went to her Highway 61 home to make sure she was okay. When he got there, everything inside the house was completely silent and still. He knocked, yet nobody responded. After Tony entered the house, he encountered a scene that no relative should ever be forced to see. Kara was lying on the bedroom floor. Her body bore evidence of a brutal struggle. Close by, 3-year-old Jamea was on the bed. Both the mother and daughter were already dead. Just hours before, Kartha had sat in the stands, cheering for her son during his football game. Now, in that moment, her relatives were struggling to understand something that seemed impossible. As word moved across Cary, investigators arrived at the residence, hoping the evidence inside might identify whoever had killed the young mother and her daughter. Yet while detectives worked through the scene, one fact quickly became impossible to ignore. There was no indication of forced entry. The doors and windows remained undamaged, and nothing pointed to someone breaking into the residence. For investigators, that immediately raised a deeply disturbing question that demanded an answer. If nobody had forced entry, how did the killer get inside? That prompted detectives to examine a possibility they routinely encounter during homicide cases. The offender could have been someone Karan knew and trusted. From the outset, investigators believed the key to understanding what happened inside that house probably rested within Kareth's own circle of family, friends, or acquaintances. The opening hours of a homicide inquiry are often the most important and time-sensitive. Detectives work methodically and carefully to record every detail at the scene before anything can be altered, moved, or accidentally disturbed. Every footprint, each fingerprint, every trace of DNA can potentially resolve a question or create an entirely different one. And once evidence is misplaced, disturbed, or contaminated, recovering it later may be impossible. And according to Kareth's relatives, those crucial first hours were marred by errors that would burden the investigation for years afterward. Family members claim that before the crime scene was completely examined, several people, including civilians and local officials, were permitted to enter and walk through the residence. And if accurate, that meant the scene was no longer preserved as investigators ideally need it to be during a homicide inquiry. For detectives, securing a crime scene isn't merely about keeping outsiders away. It's about preserving every potential piece of evidence that remained behind. Once other people started moving through a residence, separating what came from the killer from what was added later becomes considerably harder. And Cherry County is a small, quiet rural area, and murders of this scale were exceptionally uncommon there. And so whether those initial choices ultimately influenced the investigation cannot be known with certainty by anyone today. But from the family's viewpoint, they felt the case started with an immediate handicap that they feared investigators would spend years attempting to overcome. Now, after the autopsies were finished, they exposed the extreme violence of the assault. Carol had been stabbed 17 times. The autopsy showed that she sustained 2 deep slash injuries to her neck, 2 more superficial cuts, and 13 stab wounds across her chest. Investigators also found indications that Cartha had struggled to survive. A lamp was discovered broken on the floor beside her, indicating that a violent confrontation had occurred inside the bedroom before she died. And the evidence portrayed an attack that was both deeply personal and relentless. Now, what investigators discovered about 3-year-old Jamaia's death was in several ways even more devastating. The autopsy determined that Jamaiah suffered one fatal slash wound across her neck. The injury was so severe that it severed the major structures within her neck and left marks upon her cervical spine, highlighting the tremendous force used during the attack. Jamaiah was only 3 years old. The horrific violence inflicted upon such a young and defenseless child deeply stunned even experienced investigators and devastated the small community of Cary, where many local people struggled to fully understand how anyone could carry out such an unthinkable act against a defenseless little girl. Now, because there were no signs of forced entry, investigators swiftly focused on those closest to Cartha. Detectives began locating and questioning people who knew her best, trying to determine who might have had access to the house or a motive to hurt her. Among the very first individuals they questioned were Carr's boyfriend, Kevin, and Jamaiah's father. Both men assisted the investigation, and once their alibis were confirmed, neither continued as a focus of the case. With those early initial leads exhausted, detectives were left seeking a different explanation and perhaps another possible suspect. But without evidence of a break-in, and with those closest to Cartha no longer viewed as viable suspects, investigators found themselves right back at where they started. The evidence indicated that whoever murdered Carr had probably been welcomed inside the house that night. But if it wasn't someone from her immediate circle, then who could that person have been? As detectives kept retracing Carita's life, they looked for anyone who might have held a grievance against her, any encounter that had gone unnoticed, or any connection that might explain why a hard-working mother known for getting along with everyone had become the victim of such a vicious attack. Now, with those nearest to her eliminated, investigators had little left to pursue, no apparent motive, and no definite suspect. And for Cartha's family, the unanswered questions only continued to multiply over time. Who had entered that home? Who had murdered Cartha and Jamaiah? And why were they targeted? And would anyone ever be held responsible? Those questions remained for years. On September 23, 2009, 31-year-old Cartha Carroll and her 3-year-old daughter, Jamaiah, were discovered murdered inside their house in Cary, Mississippi. In the days afterward, investigators sought the individual responsible, but the case soon reached a frustrating dead end. During the weeks and months following the killings, the investigation itself began to steadily lose steam. Detectives kept chasing leads, conducting interviews, and looking for evidence that might identify the person responsible. But despite those efforts, no one was ultimately arrested, and the case slowly went cold. For Korea's family, every day without answers made it more difficult to believe justice would ever finally come. As months became years, many wondered whether the person responsible for killing Cartha and little Jamaiah would ever be identified, or whether they had escaped accountability. Then, almost exactly a year after the murders, the investigation made a sudden and shocking shift. In September 2010, investigators publicly suggested that Kara and Jamaiah's deaths might have resulted from a murder-suicide. Under that theory, Kara had killed her daughter and then ended her own life. The claim stunned Caretha's family and made almost no sense to those who knew the circumstances surrounding the murder. And the family firmly dismissed the theory, arguing that it conflicted with both the evidence and the woman they knew. Family members cited Kareth's defensive wounds and the severity of her injuries, maintaining that the physical evidence simply did not support the conclusions investigators had reached. For the Carroll family, the announcement seemed less like a credible investigative theory and more like an effort to account for a case that had remained unsolved for a year. Rather than bringing answers, it increased their frustration and reinforced their belief that the investigation had taken the wrong direction. And then, only 1 month later in October 2010, the investigation shifted direction once again. This time, investigators turned their attention toward Caretha's uncle, Tony Stamps, the same man who had found the bodies after Careth failed to show up for work. And during an interview with investigators, authorities alleged that Stamps had been dishonest about the condition of the house when he entered it that morning, and eventually he was arrested. Anthony Stamps was not charged with murdering Cartha or Jamaiah. Instead, he faced charges of obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence for the Carroll family. The arrest delivered another painful and confusing blow, especially for the relatives, who were still desperately seeking answers. Because after waiting a year for answers, investigators had initially suggested that Keitha had killed her daughter before ending her own life. And now they had arrested the same family member who had discovered the crime scene. To many, the investigation seemed to be moving farther from identifying whoever was responsible for Keitha and Jemiah's murders instead of closer to resolving them. Now, what became of those charges against Tony Stamps remains difficult to establish. A review of available records and news reports reveals no publicly documented resolution of the case to this day, despite the passage of time. At this point, it's uncertain how those charges were eventually resolved or whether they were subsequently dismissed, but one fact remains completely and plainly clear. Tony Stamps was never charged with murdering Keitha or Jemiah. Yet for the following 2 years, the investigation remained stalled and without any apparent meaningful progress at all. The murder-suicide theory continued hanging over the case, a conclusion Keitha's family firmly and consistently rejected. They never accepted that Keitha had been responsible for her daughter's death, and they kept urging investigators to pursue other possibilities instead. Then in 2012, after more than 3 years had passed without an arrest in the killings, the investigation suddenly changed course in a dramatic way. It was the development Keitha's family had been waiting for, but it did not emerge from newly uncovered DNA or some overlooked piece of physical evidence. Rather, it originated inside a Mississippi prison. In November 2012, investigators questioned a woman named Josephine Warren, an inmate serving a 6-year sentence for an unrelated burglary conviction. During that interview, Warren claimed she had taken part in the murders of Keitha and Jemiah. But she went further. Warren also named 2 other people she claimed had participated in the killings, Shaw Waller and Stephanie Ann Smith. According to Keitha's mother, Verda, Warren's confession contained remarkable detail. Verda later remembered Warren personally apologizing to the family for her part in the murders, an experience that made a lasting impression on them. For Keitha's family, the confession seemed sincere and believable. After more than 3 years of unanswered questions, they believed detectives had finally discovered the truth. Law enforcement seemed to reach a similar conclusion, and soon Warren's confession would result in arrests in the case. Although Warren's confession appeared to provide investigators with the breakthrough they had been seeking, an immediate problem emerged because, according to reporting, investigators possessed no physical or forensic evidence connecting Josephine Warren, Shawn Waller, or Stephanie Ann Smith to the murders. Instead, the case seemed to depend largely upon Warren's version of events. Meanwhile, Waller and Smith both strongly denied taking part in the killings. Despite those obstacles, prosecutors believed enough evidence existed to proceed with the case. In April 2013, prosecutors advanced the case against Josephine Warren, Shawn Waller, and Stephanie Ann Smith by presenting it before a grand jury. Warren herself stood at the center of the state's case. Her confession had become the basis for the prosecution's account of what happened to Keitha and Jemiah. Prosecutors expected her to repeat that story before the grand jury. But that wasn't what occurred. When Josephine Warren appeared before the grand jury, she did precisely the opposite of what prosecutors had expected. Rather than repeating the confession she had given investigators months earlier, Warren receded completely. Under oath, she retracted her earlier statements and acknowledged that the account she had given investigators was untrue. Almost immediately, the state's case fell apart. The confession responsible for bringing Josephine Warren, Shawn Waller, and Stephanie Ann Smith under arrest could no longer uphold the prosecution's theory. Without Warren's testimony, prosecutors were left attempting to establish a double homicide without evidence connecting any of the 3 defendants to the killings. Following Warren's recantation, the grand jury returned a no bill for Shawn Waller and Stephanie Ann Smith. A no bill means the grand jury refused to issue an indictment because it determined there wasn't enough evidence to take the case forward. Afterward, Chi County Sheriff Lindsay Adams told WLBT News that he had no idea why Warren had abruptly changed her account. Whatever prompted it, however, the effect on the investigation was instant. Because there was no indictment, Shawn Waller and Stephanie Ann Smith were released from county jail. Josephine Warren, meanwhile, was taken back to the Hinds County Detention Center to finish serving her sentence for the unrelated burglary conviction. And almost as quickly as investigators believed they had solved the murders of Caretha Carroll and little Jamea, the case had fallen apart once again. When the prison transport van returned Josephine Warren to her cell in 2013, a deep, suffocating silence once again settled across Cary, Mississippi. The crime scene tape along Highway 61 had disappeared long before. The flashing lights were gone. But in a town whose population barely reaches a few hundred people, a double homicide doesn't simply disappear. It changes. It becomes part of local folklore, talked about quietly on front porches and whispered across counters in local stores. When a case has no forced entry, no surviving forensic trail, and a prosecution that collapsed, people begin searching for a motive. Why Caretha? Why Jamea? That's when the rumors start spreading. For years, one persistent rumor has circulated throughout Sharkey County. Locals whispered that shortly before she died, Caretha had unexpectedly acquired a considerable amount of money. In a rural economy, news travels quickly. The theory holds that someone within her wider social circle, or someone nearby who closely monitored her routine, learned about the cash, and that discovery, according to the rumor, may have made her an attractive target for someone seeking quick money at all. They knew her two older children were spending that night with their grandmother, and they knew she was home alone with a toddler. They also knew that if someone knocked, Caretha, trusting almost to a fault with familiar people, would likely slide the deadbolt open. So, could it have been a robbery that turned terribly wrong? Did an argument over money spiral into a frenzy, a 17-stab wound assault meant to silence a witness, followed by the unthinkable killing of a 3-year-old child who might have identified the visitor? Still, investigators have never publicly established whether a significant amount of cash was missing from the residence, or whether the rumors were true. For Caretha's family, though, the money rumor is far less important than a much more painful belief. Carr's surviving children, including her daughter, Kenisha, have lived for nearly 2 decades with a disturbing certainty. They don't think a stranger simply came off Highway 61. They believe whoever committed this horror was someone close to her, someone familiar with her routines, someone who may even have sat beside the family, offering empty condolences while concealing the blood of a mother and child on their hands. Today, the double homicide of Caretha and Jamea Carroll remains unsolved. The Sharkey County Sheriff's Department continues to keep the case open, but the trail is growing colder. Yet cases like this don't remain unsolved because answers don't exist. They remain cold because people fear speaking out. In a community this small, somebody knows exactly who knocked at that door. Somebody knows who returned home that night with blood on them. Somebody has guarded a secret for an entire generation. Now almost 17 years have gone by since Caretha and her daughter were killed inside their house in Cary, Mississippi. Throughout those years, the investigation has made remarkable turns. Detectives pursued several theories, arrested 3 individuals, watched the case collapse inside a grand jury room, and ultimately found themselves returned to the same place where they began. Today, nobody has been convicted for the murders of Caretha and Jamea. For Caretha's family, those years have brought unanswered questions and unimaginable grief. A mother was stolen from her children. A little girl lovingly called China never got the opportunity to grow up, and the people who loved them have spent over a decade waiting for the one thing they still lack: justice. If anyone knows what happened inside Caretha's house that night, they have held that truth for more than 16 years. Memories disappear, loyalties shift, and the burden of protecting secrets only becomes heavier over time. Even the smallest fragment of information could provide the crucial detail investigators need to finally close this case. If you have information regarding the murders of Caretha Carroll and Jamea, please contact the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation or the Sharkey County Sheriff's Office. May Caretha and Jamea Carroll rest in peace. Thanks for watching Crime Chapter 51. If you enjoyed today's cases, let us know in the comments which one stayed with you the most, and tell us where you're watching from. If you love long-form true crime documentaries, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next case.